Welcome, everyone, to the latest Emerging Payments Association Asia event, which is on payment regulations. And we've got a fantastic lineup for you tonight. We've got one of the most interactive events that we've ever run at Emerging Payments Association. So you're very welcome. And but before we get into the event, I just want to give you a little bit of context. As we know, payment regulations can be challenging, and they're in an industry that's very fast moving, and in a region in Asia that's very fragmented. So at Emerging Payments Association, we put a particular focus on payment regulations. We have a project, we meet monthly, and we look at the priorities for payment regulations, and we get involved with the regulators, make submissions as required. This is done within the payments community membership of the Emerging Payments. I would also like to welcome the great panel, and I will talk about them shortly, and we're going to hear from Maha Eldamachi. But I just want to tell you a little bit of housekeeping about this event. It is on AirMeet, as you've probably experienced. And if you're not familiar with this, there are a few extra features. One is that we will be able to have a breakout session after half an hour. That's where we're going to get to talk about some within our own groups at our own tables. So you'll be able to join one of the tables. And also we will be running a Slido survey at the end of at that half-hour point, just before we go to the table. So I'll tell you more about that shortly. But firstly, we're going to hear now for 10 minutes from Maha Eldamachi, who is the Chief Payment Officer of Payments Pay.UK.
Thank you so much, John. It's a real pleasure to be here. And as John mentioned, you know, Australia is my home country, and Asia is a wonderful region that I worked in and really enjoyed very much. So I'm really pleased to be here. I hope you're all having a great evening, and I hope this evening is going to be productive for you. When I was asked to talk to you about payments and payments regulation in this forum, I kind of thought, with 10 minutes, what can I talk about? And I thought I'll bring some of the topics which are part of the kind of industry discourse that is going on here in the UK and in Europe, and you know, see how that applies to other regions. And there's quite a lot of you know, interesting similarities anyway. And you know, payments is a dynamic and evolving landscape. You know, as you know, it's no longer just the transfer of value from A to B. We're seeing innovation. You know, we're seeing the rise of fintech in and around payments. We're seeing, you know, the industry evaluating payments firms, you know, quite favourably. And, you know, there's a lot of M&A activity, there's a lot of collaboration. And that tells you that it's quite a dynamic industry and it's fast moving. Some of the drivers of the changes and the dynamism that's happening, I'll just mention three categories that we talk about. One is technology, obviously. It's been driving innovation in payments. And it's about competition. It's about driving propositions that are valuable to consumers, you know, journeys that are frictionless, more integration, the use of data, and how can you get to know your customer better and be able to serve them better. We're also seeing regulatory change, and you know, it's really fueled competition in this space, and it's been driving, for example, challenger banks to really kind of come in and disrupt, or non-bank payments firms to emerge and offer different propositions to retail and business customers alike. We're also seeing the way we live our lives is changing. You know, the way we make financial transactions are changing. And so whether that's the Internet of Things, the decline of cash availability or cash usage, and indeed a global pandemic. And a lot of the trends that we're seeing, you know, before the pandemic have seemed to have accelerated over the pandemic, which is really interesting. I'll touch on a few, give you a few stats in this regard. You know, the things that I think we need to care about is kind of that how we're moving into more of a digital world, and that's accelerated, and also the use of data has also accelerated, and kind of, you know, the pros and cons around that. And if you read actually the work of Scott Galloway, who has recently written a book called Post-Corona, he talks about that trend, the pre-pandemic trends accelerating across various industries, not just payments or digital. And he kind of, it's a great illustration of in his book of how that's happening. But also the work of Yuval Noah Harari, the author of *Sapiens*, also talks about kind of this explosion of the use of data and how it can be used for good. So digital payments is on the rise, and I'll cover some stats. This is the UK, but a lot of similar markets have experienced something similar. The cash declined by about 60% at the beginning of the pandemic. It's slightly risen, but not to pre-pandemic levels, and we think that that's going to continue. Faster Payments, which is one of the services that my team run at Pay.UK, this is the interbank account-to-account payments. That grew by 17% in 2020, and it's been growing at that rate for the last 8 years. So whilst we saw a dip at the beginning of the pandemic, it actually it bounced back, and we're seeing tremendous growth in faster payments. The batch processing, BACS, these are direct debits and direct credits, so salary payments, gym memberships, and so on. That held up also. And so whilst we've seen a decline, unfortunately, as you know, a lot of people lost their jobs, and salary payments declined. Government payments, obviously, during that period in the UK were on the rise. So it balanced itself out. And checks also is a service that we manage, and that dipped to 50% at the beginning of the pandemic. At the moment, it's sitting around 30% decline, and we don't think that that's going to kind of bounce back. Now, I mean, other trends that have been really interesting, that again we've seen some more speed in how they've been deployed is open banking, and I think open banking has been a phenomenon around the world. And in the UK, we're talking about open banking moving into open finance and expanding it further. But the number of innovative ideas that are now coming to the fore that sit around open banking, is really exciting. But even at the beginning, we always knew that open banking is a marathon, not a sprint. And I always said that it's not going to be floodgates opening. The gates will open, but the flood won't necessarily come straight away. But we did see at the FCA sandbox, about 20 to 30% of the innovative propositions that applied to be part of the sandbox were around open banking. So, the use of data and the value of what data brings has been recognised and is on the rise. There's a lot of other trends that obviously I'm sure you want to talk about in this session. DLT, which has actually been prominent in the case of cross-border payments. Cryptocurrencies is a big topic at the moment, as you all know. Every time I go to my Reuters app and click on fintech, that anything to do with fintech seems to be around cryptocurrencies. I'm not sure how much that will become a ubiquitous payment method anytime soon, but we'll see. Central bank digital currencies I'll mention as well, and standards. I think standards are really important to focus on as a payments industry. And I'll draw your attention to ISO 20022, the messaging standard that actually a lot of countries are looking to implement. And we hope that this will deliver propositions that will allow payers and the payees to know more about the payment. What is it for, its purpose, who's involved, what are the legal entities, what is it about, so remittance information, where is it, traceability, really important. And that will hopefully, give more value to some of the propositions, and also protect consumers as we move into a more digital age. So it's got multiple purposes. So the key here is innovation, which is great, because we need innovation to drive economic growth. And we need to see economic growth, particularly as we're all kind of coming out of the pandemic. But I'm talking about propositions that will bring value to retail and business consumers, which will lead to the right outcomes for these consumers. And they need to be matched and supported by a seamless payments journey. Amazon talk about this all the time. They talk about abandonment rates at checkout due to friction, and the numbers are pretty big. But also they use data and how they use data analytics in a way that could potentially detect irregular activity and detect fraud. So we can use it in a way that's going to actually help and support the security and the resilience of the payments kind of journey, as well as the seamless and frictionless propositions, and they don't necessarily need to be in conflict all the time. And the use of data, they kind of looking at data sets that are non-linear in nature and how they could potentially give us some some correlations and some insights. But as Harari states in his articles, as regulators confirm, and we hear them say all the time, we need to make sure that how we process data, how we look at frictionless payments, how we look at instant payments, is for the benefit of the consumers, and it's done in a way that's that we think about the consequences, we think about the security around it, we think about the outcomes. So I'll leave you with this. For an ecosystem to work, all parties, I think, need to be invested in the overarching outcomes. And I think firms competing is really important. It's a great thing. That's what drives firms to innovate and to deliver value. But there's areas where we can deliver public value, and it makes sense. Collaboration is really important. And I really hope that the industry can come together and collaborate, preferably before the regulator needs to intervene. And so identifying those areas of collaboration, I think, will be is really healthy and helpful for any industry. And as you all know, it's widely understood that when we collaborate, the whole is always greater than the sum of the parts. So I hope you find this useful. I hope you have a great session. And I think I'll be around for a bit more if there's any questions.
Great.
Thank you, John.
Thanks very much, Maha. That's excellent. I love Harari, and I do absolutely support the competition. We believe getting everyone in the room collaborating and working is really key. I'm going to now open up to our other two speakers to join you, and we're going to just get a few questions going. So we've got Dr. Bradley Pragnell, who is one of our payment ambassadors at the Emerging Payments Association, and he's also an independent consultant, worked on several significant projects across the world in real-time payments, and most recently are currently in North America and Canada. And we've got Gay Santos, who's based in the Philippines, and Gay has a CV that's too long for me to give it any credit, but the things that stood out for me are her experience at the World Bank, and also the work that she importantly does in financial inclusion. And I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more from Gay around that very topic, which is really important to what we do as well, and what we'll get involved in. So on that note, I just want to ask the rest of the panel then, so what were the key themes, and how was it how was the pandemic impacting the regulation agenda that you've seen? And maybe I'll just go to you, Brad, quickly on that one.
Great. Thank you very much, John, and thanks, Maha, for a great presentation. Look, I think COVID, the pandemic, has sort of been an experience of two halves. I think that when we had the initial, the first 3 to 6 months, we did see regulators, at least I observed regulators sort of pulling back a bit. Central banks were really concerned around financial stability. No one really fully understood the economic or social impact of the pandemic. And I think there was a degree of sort of caution and conservatism in that first 3 to 6 months. I think when we got to the middle of last year, the Financial System Board's roadmap for cross-border payments, I think, has really lit a spark, I think, in terms of renewing regulatory reform. And I think that that's really driven and reopened up a lot of the conversations. As John mentioned, one of the jurisdictions that I'm doing work in at the moment is in Canada on their new real-time system. Early in the pandemic in 2020, the Canadian government was effectively shelved its regulatory reforms on open banking, but by the time we got to the end of 2020, they pulled it back off the shelf and we're going full steam ahead on open banking reforms. So I think it's been a case of two halves, and I totally agree with Maha's observation from Scott Galloway again, that I think COVID has really telescoped and has accelerated existing trends. So I think that things that we've seen around digital payments, decline of checks, increasing use of online, and other form factors, I think, yeah, we're definitely seeing that come to fruition.
Great. I'm just going to change the tact a little bit, and I want to bring Gay into the conversation because she has a lot of experience in the fintech and joining all of that innovation together to improve the world through payments, which we love. So Gay, I just want to ask you, Gay, about the fintechs. What we see with the fintechs is that they're often calling on the regulators to do more and to get more involved. Can you talk to us a bit about what you're seeing in that space, and particularly in the payments regulation space?
So I will speak in terms of the Philippines. The regulator for fintech and payments would be the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, the Central Bank of the Philippines. Central Bank of the Philippines is in the forefront of implementing the National Strategy for Financial Inclusion for the Philippines. So everything that they undertake anchors to their financial inclusion strategy. So in that regard, in the context of the pandemic, as you know, the pandemic magnified the challenge of moving goods, services, money from people to people, business to people, government to people. I'm proud to say, Philippines ranks high in terms of policy directions when it comes to financial inclusion. The fintech industry has anchored their value proposition to financial inclusion. So there's such an alignment. As a result of the pandemic, it even motivated the central bank to think outside the box and move faster and strategically. So in 2020, beyond the central bank, 2 critical roadmaps were launched for the Philippines. One is the e-commerce roadmap, which is being implemented by the Department of Trade and Industry. As you know, part of that ecosystem would be the payments industry, and the digital transformation roadmap of Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. Within that digital transformation roadmap, there are 3 pillars of digital finance. One is to democratize the access to financial accounts by minimizing the deposit requirement for basic deposit account to expand financial inclusion. It also touches on wide cash-in, cash-out network, leveraging on cash agents, interoperability of retail payment system. So everything, I think what really works is that there's that focus on financial inclusion, and the strategy in terms of supervising payments and fintech are anchored to a common vision for the country to promote greater financial inclusion.
Great, thank you. The interoperability is a really key theme. I'm going to just go back a little bit and just also just want to explore a little bit on the non-bank payment providers who some believe may not have been regulated as heavily as others, but that trend seems to be changing a little bit. I'm going to ask you first of all, Bradley, for a comment, and then Maha, if you could maybe just shed some light on what's happening over in the Northern Hemisphere as well. So Brad, do you want to just take us through what you're seeing here?
Yeah, look, I think there's a general trend where policymakers, central banks, finance ministries are grappling with how do they regulate these new entrants. So it's something that's been on the roadmap for a few years now. I think we're starting to see some movement in a number of jurisdictions where we're looking at new licensing regimes and new regulatory regimes that are actually capturing these some of these new players. But again, it's part of this rather, and I won't spend too much more time on it, this sort of uncomfortable or rather slow drift away from banking regulation towards payments regulation and treating payments much more as its own domain rather than just an offshoot of banking. So I think, the UK is a good example of that, sort of really moving along that dial. But yeah, we are seeing that slow migration away from banking regulation towards payments being its own space.
It's a good cue for you then, Maha, to talk about that. Your favorite topic?
It is my favorite topic. I study it as well as do it in real life. So I think there's a balance to be struck here. One is, we do want innovative firms to come in and startups to not be burdened too much to be able to innovate and create these propositions, and the Sandbox is an example supporting that. and the advice centre in Innovate at the FCA, for example. And there's other kind of initiatives around the world. But equally, I think it needs to be about the nature of the business models and the outcomes that we need to think about. So, for example, banks have a different risk profile to a startup payments company, and making sure that that when we're looking at whether it's regulation or what licensing is needed and so on, we do that in a way that's proportionate and it's commensurate with the size, with the risk profile, with the potential consequences of what that activity might bring. And we also need to consider the growth, because I think speed to market is really important, and innovative ideas coming to market is great. But what you'll find is speed to scale is really what's going to move the dial for these disruptors to really disrupt and have meaningful disruption and competition in the market. But when they start to scale, when they start to grow, ensuring that their controls, their risk management frameworks, their governance frameworks is actually growing with their growth is a really key thing for a lot of these firms. And sometimes they grow exponentially in a short space of time. So it's making sure that that's all catching up. And I think looking at the cycle, the whole kind of life cycle of when they're a startup to when they become a really, you could think of the tech giants at the moment, when they become a really heavy hitter in the industry, we can start to think about how we regulate them and what impact they make, and regulation becomes proportionate to that.
Excellent. That's a very proactive approach, and really appreciate that you're focused on the growth outcome. I will actually ask that question to Gay as well to give us a perspective, because I with your background in the fintech and innovation side especially, and I'd just like to extend it as well around the competition. Gay, if you can tell us what you're seeing around the regulation that's coming in there to help in that space.
So I think regulation per se, I hope you won't negatively react on this. It's important, because you have to keep in mind fintech and payments industry hold two valuable assets of the community. It's not just the money, but the consumer data that can be monetized. So there ought to be some proper supervision. I agree with Maha and Bradley that it should be a balance. Actually, I had this very clear conversation with the former governor, the late governor of the Central Bank of the Philippines. His approach was a balance between compliance, whip, and moral suasion. Moral suasion that he anchored and championed towards financial inclusion. At the BSP, Central Bank of the Philippines, so that's the formula they're adopting. They adopt a sandbox approach. They test and run approach, where BSP adopts a flexible, open, enabling regulatory stance rather than the compliance whip, to really allow fintech and payments industry to grow and be more innovative and be instrumental and allow them to play a role to promote greater financial inclusion.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So just to quickly mention to people, Maha, you have a few more minutes with us, or are you hard? You're
I can
okay?
spend a few more minutes if okay. There's any.
We'll just have one more question, I think. But I just want to tell people, if you look at the chat, the event chat, there is a Slido polling set up. So please click on that and vote on the first question, which is around your regulation priorities. And there's two other questions coming. We want to capture it on the Slido, your voting, what you vote, and then we'll bring that into the rooms. They're the questions we'll be discussing. So I just wanted to touch on one last question, or sort of a broad question, I guess. And Maha, you have already touched on the open banking piece, but I wanted to the four sort of big regulations that we're seeing in payments: digital identity, open banking, buy now, pay later, and cross-border. Can you pick one of those for me, Maha, that stands out for you that you would? And I'm hoping it's buy now, pay later, because we're all we're big fans of that out here in Asia, and we know it's a worldwide thing at the moment. But please share some thoughts around one of your favorites here.
Actually, I'm sorry to disagree, John. One of my favorites is digital identity.
Okay, good. Okay.
I feel like if there is a way in which we can consider, making KYC easier, putting some security around how we can transact, whether it's payments or any other financial decisions or any other decisions, in fact, finding a framework that actually works. And potentially, I mean, I love everything global. If it was up to me, I'd like to see interoperability globally everywhere. And that's another area where potentially there could be some interoperability, and we can we can transact more seamlessly. So digital identity is my pick.
Excellent. Great, thank you. And Brad, where are you? Where are you sitting these days? What's the top of the list for you?
Look, open banking clearly, but I just want to briefly touch on buy now, pay later, because I think Maha raised a very good point. I mean, we are seeing competing approaches in different jurisdictions. So in the UK, there were attempts to try to do self-regulation that have sort of not really gone that far, and so therefore the regulators have had very little option but to step in. Whereas in Australia, full credit to the Australian Finance Institute Association, led by Diane Tate. They've done a self-regulatory code that most of the major players have signed up to. Fingers crossed that it'll be able to hold together. But again, I'll sort of reiterate what Maha said, is that it's if industry is able to self-regulate, if industry is able to come together and to agree on a way to do things, be it standards, be it consumer protection, then that's always a good first step before the regulators needing to step in. Because I think in the most instances, the regulators would rather that industry sort it out first than them having to unnecessarily step in. So I think looking for those forums, those entities where you can self-regulate, I think, and participating in those activities, I think that's really important.
And Gay, if you could finish us off, then we'll start to look at the breakout sessions.
So I would pick open banking, open API. If there's time, I'm going to touch on regulation of BNPL. So open banking, open API, that calls for less investments for financial institutions in their physical infrastructure. Therefore, potentially, it can drive the transaction costs and offer products at a lower price and widening the inclusion of the community in terms of financial products. It also allows for the consensual sharing of data, therefore driving critical mass of data into the infrastructure. And that can be a proxy for the traditional credit assessment or credit data by someone who's not included financially. So it has a lot of potential in promoting greater financial inclusion. However, anything, on innovation has to have a focus on the proper governance, the right internal controls, and the accountability to educate the consumers and the users on the importance of protecting data. And that's a two-way stream. Educate the consumers to protect data and take the accountability to protect the consumers' data. So segueing on regulation of buy now, pay later, I think there should be some degree of regulation, because what resonates to me is that what happened during the subprime mortgage crisis in the US, wherein people were misled, or consumers were misled to believe that they can pay more than what they're actually earning. So I think there comes the angle of accountability on consumer education and protection.
Perfect, thank you. That's a broad conclusion of this part of the session. So thank you all to the panel for your input. It's been absolutely fantastic. It's been very fast and rapid, so I think there's a lot of things to play back here. This section will be made available as a video, so we will let people know where that's available after the event. Maha, I understand you have to drop off for your other meeting, so appreciate your time so far. and with Gay and Brad, if you stay on the line. So what we're going to do is we're going to break out it onto the tables. So when this session stops here now, you'll go onto the tables. And but before we do that, I just want to push the next question to you on the Slido. And before we do that, I'll even just give you a quick update on what the top results were, if I have them here. Yep. So open banking actually won at 60%, and digital identity was second at 47%. So we got the right topics of interest to this group, so we're on the money. Now the next question is up for people to partake in. So this one is really looking at the impact of payments regulations. So what are you seeing as the necessity or the actual result of the regulations in the payment space? So, and the top of the list, well, we see inclusion is there. So if people just want to vote on that quickly, we'll give a minute. So on your app, if you refresh the app, you'll see that question has popped up on your screen now. Whether you're using your phone for it or whether you're using the internet, both should be live. Okay, all right, and then okay, so right, well, okay, so let's jump onto the tables now then, and there you'll be able to discuss these questions more. Then we'll come back, and Gay and Brad will bring us conclude and summarize what's been discussed so far. So welcome back. So what we're going to do now to sort of bring this all together is to maybe just first of all, Brad, before we just go, I'm just going to see if I have the poll on the second question, see how we rated there. So the impact of sorry, I'm on the last question. I have okay. Well, sorry. Oops. Yeah. So the oops. Give me 1 second. Yeah. So the impact of the regulations was level playing field was 67%, and inclusion was 58%, and clarity of operating, so how the, getting more precision or information around how things working was 42%. So that's interesting. So inclusion is high on the list. Okay. So Brad, I'm going to hand it back to you. Maybe if you want to just share some thoughts around things that you've heard today on this event, and maybe just let us know where the regulations are going.
Sure, thanks, John. The table that I joined in, a very lively table, and mainly the discussion was around open banking. So we had a discussion around open banking, and I think some of the themes that came through were the competing approaches between, more regulator-led. Ooh, sorry, I'm getting the feedback there. More regulator-driven approach as opposed to a more market-led approach, and I think that there was some concerns that a heavily regulator-driven approach could end up turning open banking into a compliance project. So, and people not really looking at the opportunity, though. Conversely, so we had one of our table mates from the UK, and he identified that in particular verticals, e-commerce merchants are looking at open banking. They're looking at real-time capabilities as a way to provide alternative payments or better customer experiences than card on file and other payment means. So that's promising, I think. So I think that's really, and then lastly, there was a discussion around open data and around the importance of regulators not just staying within their verticals, but looking at it from an economy-wide approach, and really policymakers need to think about it in terms of open data as much as they do around open banking. So those are kind of the themes that I heard at some of the table discussions that I joined in.
Excellent. And Gay, how did you what did you pick up from the priorities and payment regulations?
So on the table that I sat in, it was more focused on looking into regulation. So I probed further because, as I mentioned, sandbox approach worked well in the Philippines. So it made me wonder, is it working in other jurisdiction? And what I got is that, I mean, it's a case-to-case basis. Some just go straight to the market rather than go through the sandbox approach of if there is one. Another insight I got is that regulators can really play a role in furthering inclusion and competition. So that's especially true for India, and again, true for the Philippines. But the bigger challenge right now is really if you want to adopt payments together with that e-commerce. One thing that I got from the group is that there should really, and I believe in it, there still need to be a shift in mindset in terms of the looking into the cultural angle of why people or community are not adopting payments. And if you're not able to understand that well, then you cannot be able to maneuver and increase the adoption of payments.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing those thoughts. So I just, what I will share from my table as well, it was similar. We talked about the fragmentation across the region and the challenges of actually setting up a business in the region. You know, you think you're going to go to Asia, but all of a sudden you have to sit down and then work it out, and sort of work out your risk profiles, your time to market, the business opportunities, and it's not easy. So the question we were asking is, how can regulators make that easier, and how do you operate in that environment? Because the technology allows the businesses to be across the region, and this particular business that was raising this as well, actually it comes from the Northern Hemisphere in the e-commerce space too, and actually has that great access in Europe, but not finding the same level of opportunity in Asia. So I just, was there any further thoughts, Brad, that you had that came to mind there?
Yeah, look, I think, John, one thing that came up in one of the discussions I joined in is, look, I think a couple of things. I think, first of all, when I think many of us have been in payments for many years, say, if you've joined the industry 15, 20 years ago, it was a very lightly regulated. I mean, there were lots of standards and there was lots of infrastructure and industry agreements and things like that, but regulators were a little bit off to the side. They really didn't have a very significant approach. You may have dealt a bit with the central bank or with the prudential regulator, but payments was sort of not really in their line of vision. That's changed over the past 10 to 15 years. Anti-money laundering, consumer protection, innovation, competition, they're all really important themes now that regulators are really grappling with. And I think they create opportunities, clearly. Things like open banking create opportunities, but they also create challenges. I think if cross-border is going to be an important thing for the industry to deal with, then digital identity and anti-money laundering are going to be really, really important parts of that equation and how we solve that. Because I think at the moment, most of us who have to deal in the cross-border space would recognize that anti-money laundering and sanction screening is very difficult, can be very problematic, and create some real significant risks. So it's a real compliance challenge for anyone in this space. So look, there's some great opportunities ahead, a lot of things for people to keep an eye on, but yeah, I think it's exciting if you're in this space. I agree with Maha. It's going to be a very exciting couple of years.
Great, and I think Maha is living proof of the focus of the payments regulator, because that's her job. So yeah, hopefully we'll see a few more of those roles opening up in the region. I think it can only benefit the payment space. Gay, did you have any final thoughts to summarize before we close this event?
Yes, hi. So I think there are two things: trust and sustainability. I think one thing that was not really touched on is the operational risk mindset that every fintech player or payments player should really embrace. Because today, the only way you can differentiate yourself where resources are constrained is how you can really build the trust, and you build the trust of the consumers and users by really managing your operational risks well, in the way you design your infrastructure, in the way you manage data. You should ensure that you have the right governance and internal controls, because trust is a priceless proposition right now, or a priceless product differentiation or value proposition that's really much needed today in this uncertain times under the pandemic and beyond.
I couldn't agree more on the sustainability, and I think that's a really important topic. And Tony Craddock, the Director General in the UK, spoke to David Craig of Refinitiv on that very subject, and I think it's it's just the start of something it's really affecting finance, but payments as well, and of course trust in a fast-moving digital world. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that as well. Well, thank you again, Brad and Gay, and obviously Maha for her time earlier. I think this has been a great first event for us on AirMeet. We've certainly tested everything we wanted to today, so and it's all stood up, so that's good. So we're trusting this platform a bit better, and yeah, we're looking forward to doing more on it. So on that note, we are hosting a very significant G20 focused cross-border payments roadmap project event next week, which is called the Institute of International Finance, EPA Global Payments Forum. It'll be held on this platform around this time on next Tuesday, and really that's going to kick off a whole series of forums that we're going to see over the next few years. So it's a very exciting initiative, and it's getting a lot of global focus. So this will be bringing some of the things we've talked about today, because regulation, of course, is going to play a big part in cross-border too. Also, I do want to mention, and Gay, hopefully this is music to your ears as well, that we do support, when we run these events, we do make a charity contribution to B1G1 to those less fortunate who don't have access to this education and features that we're able to benefit from here. So we do share that with them. And I would say keep watching this space, because we are going to play this recording back, and please stay in touch with Emerging Payments Association. We look forward to seeing you at our next event.
Thank you, John.
Thanks you very
everyone.
much, John. Thanks, Bradley. Bye.